let's talk about accessibility. So I've had the pleasure of being kind of an advocate for accessibility over the last year, and it's kind of an important topic. And I could admit in the early part of my career, I didn't know how important it was. So I thought it was best for us to talk about it here. And just let's talk about it from the beginning. So let's start with what is accessibility. Accessibility refers to making applications accessible to people with disabilities when using mobile devices. So anybody with disabilities should be able to use our application. It's important to design products, devices, services, environments that can be used by people with disabilities or impairments. And also, we should avoid common practices that will prevent users from using the app who have disabilities. So that's generally what we're talking about here. We want to make our app accessible for users with any type of disability. So why is it necessary? So we could start with this quote from Kevin O'Leary. He says, the fastest growing cost in American business is compliance. Getting sued is a heavy cost. ADA site compliance helps businesses and public entities make their websites and PDFs compliant. This is a big deal. So if he thinks it's a big deal, I think it's a big deal. And getting sued is a big deal. And that's the biggest of the problems, but also smaller problem is that when people use the app and it's not accessible, you get complaints, you get bad ratings and things like that. So at the extreme level, as a company with an application that's being publicly used, you could face some litigation if your app is not compliant. So let's keep talking about why it's necessary. A survey says 70% of visually impaired people who use a screen reader use it on a mobile device. And on average, 14% of users rely on screen readers to navigate the web. So it is a pretty small portion, but large enough for us to care about it. So, and that includes 7.3 million Americans who rely on screen readers and using the voiceover feature on the mobile app. And so it's very important for us to think about that while we're developing our apps. By prioritizing accessibility, we can ensure that the app reaches the widest possible audience and limit your chances of accessibility related litigation. So this is what we just talked about with, if you're a public company with an application that's used by the general public, we got to make sure that it's accessible. It also widens your reach and builds brand recognition, and it also lower your long-term development costs and improves user retention, because you don't want to have to spend time and money going back and making your app accessible. ADA compliance is pretty big. I've worked in the financial tech industry for quite a while, and ADA compliance has always been a topic. Commercial businesses fall under ADA Title III, and it prohibits discrimination based on disability. That's generally what it means. So when you hear ADA compliance, it means the app should be accessible and able to be used by people with the disabilities. Here's some key considerations. So this is pretty important. We should have bold headlines. We should have header components. I'll talk about that later. Larger fonts is pretty important. We have a feature in iOS where you could change it in your settings, where you could change the size of the font. That has to work properly in your app. Also, extra padding and white space, make sure that components have enough space between each other, and make sure things are not too close to the edge of the screen. Large buttons and tap zones, make sure your tap zone is not too small. And also structured and sequential content flow. And I'll show that a little bit later, and Ilya will get into this also when we demonstrate how the screen reader and voiceover will go through each other accessible elements. So that's very important. And also the last point is consider the color for colorblind users. We don't want to create interfaces that are reliant on color, because we have colorblind users that could possibly not be able to see the differences of colors. So these are just a few considerations to think about. Next slide. So here we talk about mobile web application best practices. And I mentioned mobile web because on even in iOS, on mobile apps, we kind of follow the same standards as mobile web. And also the web content accessibility guide is what we use for our iOS application. So the WCAG was built on these 4 principles, and it's the core principles. And starting with perceivable. So these are the way that we design accessibility. It should be perceivable with one of our either sight or sound. We should be able to perceive what's going on the screen with just the voiceover. So that's the first one, perceivable. The second one is operable. We should be able to operate simply on these elements without some type of complex explanation. And also keep in mind things like, using things with one hand or things like that, because not everybody has 2 hands available. Not everybody can also use the app only in portrait mode. So make sure that, when you flip it to landscape, you can still operate the app as normal. And next, understandable is pretty self-explanatory. Make sure that the information on your screen is understandable and it's not too complex or confusing. And the last one is robust. Make sure you're thinking intently on how to make your experience for the user as robust as possible and as usable as possible. So these 4 principles are the basis of accessibility. And if you go to the WCAG website, you'll see that all of the criteria is based on these 4 principles. So next slide. Okay, so there's a few tools that we use to audit accessibility. And by audit, I mean just check our own application on what kind of issues that we may have in our app. So currently, I've been fond of events, and it works pretty well. And I'm gonna demonstrate a report. I'll show you guys a report that was created from events. And Events Mobile Flow Analyzer is just an audit tool that will, you can manually scan each screen, and it will give you a report for all the problems. Or you could use the SDK, and you can incorporate this tool during your UI testing, and you can scan each screen and generate a report after your testing is complete. So it's a pretty cool tool, and I'll give you the pros and cons after I show you guys the report. And the next one, Accessibility Inspector in Xcode, and this is, to me, this is the main tool that everybody should be using. So you run your app in a simulator, and you can open up Accessibility Inspector from the developer tools, and you could use the voiceover and select the different components in your app from there. So I think those 2 are the main auditing features. And some other tools that I found, Google Scanner for Ally, that's so Google created this framework. It kind of lives underneath your app, so you have to install it with your app. And also Google Toolbox, there's another one. It's based on Objective-C, so I don't really recommend it. It's kind of old and it hasn't been managed. I think the last update was 4 months ago, and before that it was 3 years ago. So I just wanted to provide this just in case anybody wants to try it. The last one is the XC UI test for accessibility, and this is just generally talking about UI testing and using accessibility labels to test the app. So those are the main tools that I would consider while auditing your app for accessibility. So that being said, I'm going to show you guys an example of in an events report. I did a few scans of just the automation tool for iOS. This is just the app that iOS provides for automation. It's just everybody has this app on their phone. And as you can see, there's a list of all the elements in this column. The issue type is here. The severity is here. You got a nice description of what the problem is. And also on the far right, you see the WCAG criteria and a link to it. So you can actually see exactly what kind of poor principle that it is referring to. So just a few of these problems that you see here. You see the duplicate name here. So if you have more than one of the same name on the screen, it will create a minor issue for that. Color contrast is another one. So there should be a clear contrast between the background and the color of certain text and things like that. Tappable area, I see a lot of times. Sometimes our default buttons are too small and not tappable. So that's something that we should always consider when we're creating a button. Let's see. This is a different screen here. More color contrast issues. And yeah, so this is just an example of what the report looks like. As you can see, there's no critical issues here because I scanned one of the default iOS apps. So I would hope there's no critical issues in an app that comes with your phone. So, but we still see some serious issues, some clear false positives, as you can see. But yeah, so you can see a lot of the same errors here: duplicate name, color contrast, tappable area, things like that. So yeah, so I just thought it was very important to show you guys an example of what this events mobile flow analyzer report looks like.
Does this provide like a score?
No, actually, no, it does not provide a score. I'm sure that we can. I mean, I guess technically you can create a score, just depending on how many issues that you found. So, but to me, I think if you have more than one critical issue, I guess it's pretty much a fail, you know. But as I found, sometimes these critical issues are not necessarily critical. We could create a score based on the number of issues that we found. But yeah, that would be nice if events would provide something like that. Because I've used other tools where they give you like an actual score. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I've used others as well that do provide you a score where, you know, like critical just drops the score significantly, and then high, you know, drops it a little lower, and then, you know, based on the number of highs that you have versus the number of medium and the, you know, like number of lows, that would determine, you know, a score, and then you can block, you know, an application, or, you know, if you have like a PR and it drops below that minimum score, like let's say you open something that has a critical error, then it might say, okay, well, this is not going to go through because it's below like a score of 80, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just thinking out loud, I think currently that would have to be a manual process. So I know we have worked in the past using events during UI testing, and we could technically take the report and then find the number of issues and create our own scoring system. I believe events is still developing new features, so maybe that'll be a new feature that they release it pretty soon. So yeah.
Cool.
So last point with events, it's not free, but I think they have a free trial. Yeah, so I just wanted to make that clear. So I just wanted to give you guys just my recommendations now from using events and other auditing tools, because I know there's in my opinion, there's something to consider here, because we don't want to add more overhead, and we want to be able to use this tool to help us and not hurt us. So the first thing I found is that the defects found in the reports are often very, very negative. And I would first recommend to only focus on the critical issues. The serious issues are issues, but also they're not gonna make or break your app. And generally, these auditing tools don't guarantee compliance. They're not gonna fix the problems for you, but they will find every single little issue that you may have. So I can imagine that some, product leads, project managers will see this report and see 80 issues, and they'll think that the app is terrible and everything is bad. So I think that's one thing to consider. Not everything is bad. You should read the actual issue and determine yourself if you are breaking one of the WCAG rules, and then create a bug or defect based on that. So I just thought that was very important. We should not be doing a blind thing and just creating bugs for every single defect we find from the tool. Also, audits are only useful if your accessibility practices are incomplete. And by what I mean by that is that it's only useful using these tools if you already done all of the work with making sure that all of the components and all the elements already check all the things that you already consider. So auditing, I think, is just something you do on top of everything after you already have done your work to make sure everything's accessible. So my last 2 points is just to say, I think accessibility inspector should be the main tool that we all use to manually test our app. Like I said before, you can run it just from developer tools and running your app in the iOS simulator. Also, there's no substitution for running your app on a real device and testing it yourself. So install the app on your real device and turn on the voiceover. And that's pretty simple to do. So before I go on, I'll just say you turn on voiceover by going to settings and accessibility. I have a shortcut on my phone. I click the right button 3 times and it turns on voiceover. And that's how I could test accessibility. So it's just something quick. So this is what I recommend most of the time. Using a tool is helpful, but also manually checking that you're doing things the right way is also important. Is most important. So I created a small checklist based on a checklist that we use every day while we're testing at work currently. So I just summarized the main ones that I think are very important. So number 1, have descriptive headings. Make sure you label each of the element as a heading if it is a heading. And I'm sure Ilya will go into that later with actually talking about the accessibility elements. Color contrast and hit targets important. You saw that in the report also. Dark mode color contrast, test the app in dark mode, and that's pretty much a basic thing you should do. That's, I guess, overlooked quite a bit. So just make sure you go to developer mode and change it to dark mode just to test that the colors they match properly. Make sure the focus moves in logical order from left to right. I see this being a problem more often than not. Just make sure that if there's any issues with the ordering of the elements, make sure that's fixed. Make sure there's no empty elements that gain focus. This is pretty common. I think I made the mistake a lot of times when I first started using Swift UI, and I put a lot of these views that are empty just as placeholders and things like that. Make sure that you turn accessibility hidden for those elements so that the user's not focusing on empty elements. Also, make sure orientation changes are appropriate. A lot of times, if you switch to landscape, everything gets all messed up, and you should be able to use the app in portrait mode and landscape, and that's definitely an accessibility issue. Display text in bold and larger text, I already talked about this, but make sure that you test that manually. Just go to the settings and change it to large text and see if everything works properly. Make sure the images are non-actionable. This I've seen a lot too, where a developer creates an image that's actually another type of element, or they want a button, but they'll create an image that's tappable, but the voiceover doesn't know that it's a button. So just make sure the images that are non-actionable, make sure that you set the right accessibility traits for that. And more on that for actionable elements, make sure that it gets announced properly. This is the proper format for announcing these elements. For for a button or anything like that, make sure that it's announced properly. Also for form elements, make sure they have labels. Every element in the form should have labels. And table elements move in logical order. This is pretty important when you see tables in mobile apps, because there's so many columns. You don't want to have the user cycle through each element if they don't have to. Most of the time, you want to group each row as its own element, and pretty much you want to be smart about it, and use your intuition and think as if you are only able to use the app with the voiceover on. So and then the last point is controlling actual elements using the keyboard. It's something that a lot of developers don't think about. Just being able to control the app with just the keyboard. And that's like the extreme part of it, but just think about that, because some people only use the keyboard to use their mobile app. So, all right, so this is just showing you guys how to turn on VoiceOver. Go to settings, accessibility, and turn on VoiceOver here. And like I said, I have a shortcut on my phone where I click the right button 3 times and it comes up with the VoiceOver on. And my last point, yep, accessibility inspector. If you open up Xcode and open up developer tool, you'll see accessibility inspector right there. And it's very easy to use. You just have to select the target that you're testing, and you could hear the voiceover as if it's you're using voiceover. One note for this, I found that it doesn't always act like a real device. Sometimes there's some operating system error or something like that where there's a known bug for accessibility inspector. So I still recommend testing on a real device. Run your app on your real device and use the voiceover feature to test the user experience while voiceover is on. So.
Awesome. Bam, that was an awesome presentation. I really do appreciate it. Accessibility is a really important aspect of development that a lot of times is missed. So it's really great from BAM to show this. And thank you all for joining us today as well. Just remember, we do this every Thursday at 5:15 Eastern Time, where we talk about topics that are popular and focus on a lot of the industry standards and the thought leadership with InRhythm. So don't forget to join us for next Thursday, and I'll see you then. Thank you.